From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Support for LPM podcasts comes from the Eye Care Institute and Butchertown Clinical Trials, where they strive for diversity, equity, and inclusion within their staff, patients, and clinical trial participants. To learn more, visit butchertown.clinic.
I'm a Jew from Kentucky, that's what I am. The good Lord foresaw it with his infinite plan.
Welcome to the Bluegrass Schmooze. I'm Rabbi Ben Fried. This is it, folks, the last episode of our first season. And it's a pretty special one. The tables have turned and our spouses are interviewing us. We recorded it live at Ohavay Zion Synagogue in Lexington, and we can't wait to play it for you. But first, it's the month of Elul, and you know what that means. Your rabbi is about to get really busy getting ready for the high holidays. We'll cover it all on this episode of the Bluegrass Schmooze.
Forever a Jew with Kentucky, my home.
Shalom, y'all. This month in Judaism, we are talking about the month of Elul.
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 We say it with a little bit of a shudder. If you are a longtime listener of the Shmooze, you will remember that Cheshvan is like Rabbi's favorite month because we're like done with all the holidays. Elul is like the month of when, you know, in a horror movie when like the scary thing hasn't happened yet, but like it's just like that violin playing and it's like and it's coming. That's Elul. Except the thing that's coming isn't horror. It's wonderful and amazing. It's just a lot of work for rabbis.
It's a lot of work.
So this is the month, though, that is leading up to Tishrei. So Tishrei is the first month. If you were listening, that was a month when we talked about all of the high holidays. But they don't just come out of nowhere. That in the Jewish calendar, each month kind of sets up the next one. We've talked about how different periods set up other periods on the calendar. We talked about the Omer between Passover and Shavuot. We talked about the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av. And so now we're going to talk about Elul, which is this month that really leads up to Tishrei and the high holidays, and it is a really active role in doing that.
Yeah, Elul gives us an opportunity to sort of mentally and spiritually prepare for what comes next, for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, for these holidays that really beg us to look inward, do really deep introspection. If you listen to our last season and our very first episode of the podcast, when we talked about the month of Tishrei and the high holidays, we spent a lot of time talking about tshuva, this process of looking inward, of reflecting. There are lots of different meanings to that word, lots of different connotations. You can head back to season 1 for a refresher on all that tshuva and the month of Tishrei is about. But Elul is really a gift, I think, that we have, because to do the high holidays seriously, to give them, especially Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the attention and real energy that they require, you need to prepare, right? You can't. It's sort of like, right? We're recording this a little bit ahead of time, but we just finished watching the Olympics, right? The Olympics just came to an end, and as an outsider, as a spectator, you watch these athletes and you think they just make it look so easy, right? They show up and they compete in these events and it looks seamless, so much so that I, who am a very non-athletic person, am convinced that I can do what Simone Biles does or what Leon Marchand does. Like, I can just show up in Paris and compete at the Olympic level.
I think you could. I'm fully convinced. Which event, what sport would you compete in, Shani?
I would aspire to compete in gymnastics, but the truth is I would probably be better suited to breaking.
Oh, okay. If you come to our next live taping of the Bluegrass Schmooze, maybe Shani will break out some of her breaking moves.
Or table tennis. That would be pretty cool. Actually, a gold medalist in fencing is a University of Kentucky medical student, Lee Kiefer. Yeah. Anyway, but these athletes show up and they make it look so easy. And I think when we arrive at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, perhaps to an outside spectator, they might think, wow, there's such an ease, there's such a comfort in this community, in this service. in whatever it is I'm observing. But the truth is that we have all of Elul to be practicing, to be preparing for the high holidays.
And I think that's true of, the metaphor works in so many different ways. My family and I were just at a music festival for a weekend in the Berkshires, and we were actually talking about, because the Olympics were on, kind of the similarities between like peak creative talents, musicians, actors, all that, and athletes. And one of the things that they share is that idea of practice, right? Whether you're preparing for an athletic event or rehearsing for a symphony or for a play that you're in or any of those, you would never just get on stage and try to do it, live.
Right.
I mean, well, there are improv comedians. That is its own thing. But even in improv, you practice a lot. That when you see, these great improv comedians, the only reason they're good at kind of like doing it spontaneously is because they've done it over and over and over again, and they've practiced. And so Elul gives you that opportunity. Ideally, in Judaism, the whole year you're reflecting, right? That there's not a moment that you're not thinking about this, that you're not trying to be your best self, but that can be a little exhausting. And so we do have this more intense month leading up to the high holidays when we're supposed to be doing it, every day really as a part of this month. And there are some ritual things that we do that remind us of that there's some specific practices that we have once we start Elul that start this. So one of the big one that you would notice if you went to a synagogue not on Shabbat during Elul is we blow the shofar. That the ram's horn that we blow, that is most famously blown during Rosh Hashanah and at the end of Yom Kippur, is actually blown every day during the month of Elul. That this wake up call, it's almost like you're hitting the snooze button every day until you get to Rosh Hashanah, right? Until you get to like the 100 blasts, because you only get a few blasts every day on Elul. But it's waking you up. It's almost accustoming you a little bit, or making you accustomed to hearing that sound, to recognizing in your body how it feels, what it's supposed to be, what it's supposed to be doing to you as you go and start preparing for the high holidays.
Yeah, the language that I was raised with around shofar blowing during the month of Elul is that it's a spiritual alarm clock that, we, for better and for worse, right, during the rest of the year, we sort of go through the motions and we have our routines and our patterns. And the shofar serves as this divine wake-up call. And it's physical, it's a ram's horn, and it's loud, and it's supposed to sort of shake us out of our routines toward this goal of really reflecting and doing introspection. And there just one more piece about practice that I wanted to come back to, which is I often encounter people who they come to a service at the synagogue for the first time, or they're trying to get involved in Jewish community, and they're very anxious about spirituality and the experience and want every moment in the synagogue to be transcendent. And everything should be so uplifting and emotional and moving and powerful. And I think what Elul actually reminds me, which I find so helpful and I try to remember constantly, is that, like you said, it actually takes a great deal of practice to get to a place in your spiritual practice or your religious life where you can access transcendence. And it also means that not every moment is going to be the most important spiritual moment that you have in your life. So we have the month of Elul, we have this sort of repeated practice of blowing the shofar to incrementally get us to that place where maybe it might not happen even on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that you have a very powerful spiritual experience. Hopefully you do. But even if you have one transcendent, sort of ecstatic spiritual moment during the high holidays, that's because you've put in the work during the month of Elul.
Yeah. And I think that's true of so many things that we do, that at first, we do it and it fills us with this sense of amazingness. I remember the first time that I started really doing yoga seriously, like every yoga class I went to was amazing. And then I went to a class and I was like, that wasn't that good of a class. And my yoga teacher was like, now you're getting it. Because you've done it enough now that you can recognize that sometimes it's going to be good and sometimes it's not. And the same, as you're saying, is true with prayer. That every time I go to, morning minyan at 7:30 a.m., is it the most transcendent experience I've ever had in my life? No. but it's still giving me the practice, it's giving me the tools, it's giving me the understanding that then when those moments of transcendence arrive, that I'm prepared to meet them. So one of the other practices that we have during this month of Elul, we also start adding to our liturgy a little bit. That, because again, we're ramping up. We're doing all these things that are turning us towards the high holidays, and so we start to say a special psalm every day, Psalm 27, and that psalm actually is about kind of turning towards. That the very last line of that psalm says, "Kaveh el Hashem, chazak ve'ametz libecha, ve'kaveh el Hashem." That you are turning towards God, being strong and of good courage, and then turning toward God. And that line, especially that idea of chazak ve'ametz libecha, to be strong and stout of heart, is one that is both found in this psalm and that is found throughout the book of Deuteronomy, which we're also reading right now. Throughout our reading of the Torah, we're reaching toward the end. So we're reading the last of the 5 books of Moses. And this line of chazak ve'amatz, of be strong and courageous, is kind of repeated over and over again, often talking about Moses transitioning leadership to Joshua, that Joshua is supposed to take on this strength and courage or strength of heart to go into this uncharted, new land that they're all going into. And it's very cool, I think, that the book that we're reading in the Torah is also about this kind of crossing over into a new thing. That just as we are prepared to cross over into a new year, and we're supposed to be strong and courageous in doing that, and we're at this kind of liminal moment in the calendar where it's now 5784 and it's about to be 5785. And in the Torah, we're reading about the Jews who are on one side of the Jordan River, and their lives are about to change as they cross over into this other side and go into this land that they're supposed to inhabit.
It's such a beautiful connection, connecting Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, to Elul and this month of preparation and anticipation really leading up to the high holidays. I think another connection, so Deuteronomy is the sort of repetition. It's Moses' way of, in a very lyrical and poetic way, saying goodbye to the Israelites, right? We know that Moses is not going to lead them into the land of Israel, and he really takes the whole book to process this transition, to process the end. But I think in its way, the sort of poetry of Devarim, of the book of Deuteronomy, can actually parallel the added liturgy that we have during this period. So we add this psalm, Psalm 27, which is all about finding strength in relationship with God, sort of being inspired, knowing that God is there with you through these moments of transition and anticipation and fear, frankly. And so it came to mind that that's another really beautiful way to link where we are in our Torah reading cycle with where we are on the calendar. And it's another, I think, poignant reminder that, yes, we should look forward to a new year and it's a new start, but for many people, that also comes with lots of trepidation and worry and concern, and to say nothing of the big spiritual, theological questions of Yom Kippur, which is, am I actually living up to these goals and expectations that I've set for myself? Am I doing a good job? Am I a good person fundamentally? Am I, who I am supposed to be, and living into those things in a true and authentic way?
And I think one of the amazing things about this month of Elul is because, right, like as you're saying, that can be really big and even a little scary to do all of that. It's not just scary for rabbis, right? It can be scary for anyone. But another big part of this month of Elul in Jewish tradition is that Elul is an acronym, some people say, for Ani lidodi v'dodi li, which means I am my beloved and my beloved is mine. And in this case, the beloved is God. That it's actually this moment where even with this heightened maybe sense of am I doing enough? Am I doing it right? That there's this closer connection to God and a connection of love specifically. And another thing that in the kind of mystical tradition, there's also this idea of Hamelech Basadeh, that the king is in the field. That during Elul, that like the rest of the year, God is kind of like a king or a monarch who's away in a castle, and if the monarch is in the castle, you have to go through the guards and you have to go through the viziers and the ministers in order to get an audience. But during the month of Elul, the king is in the field. God is out wandering the field and is accessible in a way that God isn't usually. And so that you, even though you have this moment of like really looking at yourself and thinking, am I good enough? At the same time, we have these messages of divine love, of divine accessibility, of God being there for you, even as you are kind of wrestling with those things.
Yeah. And things, I would say there's a different energy in the synagogue around, like starting in Elul and for sure through the high holiday season. I think it has to do with what you're describing, this sort of closeness maybe that we feel with God, accessibility with God that we feel in a different way. But I also find that like people are more open. People really look forward to having a spiritual experience in the service, whether it's finding a reading in the prayer book that feels resonant to them, or, you know, hearing someone sing a melody that they are familiar with that's sort of unique to the high holiday season, and that brings them back to a happy memory or connects them to family and friends and ancestors. There's an openness and a vulnerability in the shul that is palpable to me in a different way. And then you had mentioned earlier that, you know, these questions and questions of reflection and closeness and relationship to God are things that are maybe heightened during this time of year, but they don't go away after the high holiday season ends. And one thing that I am often thinking about, especially around this time of year, but is how do we hold on to the unique sort of special quality of the high holidays, but also not limit the experience and the feeling and the joy and the openness that we feel at this time to the fall months, right? Like, how do we say, I had this amazing experience on Yom Kippur or on Rosh Hashanah, or even during Elul. How do I sort of replicate or hold on to that feeling through the rest of the year without also sort of cheapening the special quality of the high holiday? So it's a challenge, but something I think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, to go back to your Olympics metaphor, right? Like, there's world championships every year in track and field and gymnastics and all these things that, like, to be honest, I don't really watch that much. Like, I do not, and I don't watch ping pong or fencing or like a lot of these things on a regular basis. But like when the Olympics comes, it's this really big deal that we all gear up for and that we all get excited about. And so, right, I think it's a great question of how do we carry that on? And what does that look like to try to make it not just a once in a while thing, but it without diluting the specialness of the once in a while thing? Because part of the specialness of the Olympics is for like these 2 weeks, the whole world is watching. And then the one other thing that I want to mention was that as you know, the month of Elul is all about kind of ramping up. That last week of Elul, right before the high holidays, is where it really kind of like, we're like, okay, now it's really time to pay attention. That begins with something we call slichot, which is, or Leil Slichot, an evening of Slichot, which is a special service where we actually start to say the tshuva, the repentance prayers in that last week right before leading up to Rosh Hashanah. And they start off with this evening that's often done, or it is always done on a Saturday night after sundown, often very late at night, depending on the community that you're in. And it really starts with some of those melodies. It's the first time you hear a lot of those high holiday melodies that really put you in the mood for the season, and often will be paired with some sort of, you know, some congregations do journaling activities that, you know, encourage introspection. Others do activities that involve, you know, some sort of justice issue of looking at not only personally, but as a community, how have we missed the mark and how can we try to do better in this next year? And is a kind of moment, an evening that is focused on tshuva, on repentance, to really then get us going for that next week and then into that kind of like final push towards the main event, as it were.
Yeah, I love that Slichot happens on Motzei Shabbat, right after Shabbat ends, because we come out of the holiness and the joy and the peace, really, of Shabbat. And we're actually supposed to be resistant to ending Shabbat. We, you know, if you're thinking about making plans on Saturday night and you're talking about it on Saturday afternoon, you should preface by saying, should Shabbat ever end, I would really love to go see the new Glenn Powell movie. So we're actually supposed to approach the ending of Shabbat with some resistance, and because we want to hold on to that special feeling for as long as we can, and actually bring some of the Kodesh, bring some of the holiness of Shabbat into the rest of the week. Mm-hmm. But Slichot actually helps prolong that, and brings us to this final push that's full of lots of last-minute preparation and lots of work, both for rabbis and clergy, but also for communities like our religious community. Our volunteers do so much to get the synagogues ready. Yes. But it's not just sweet, but it's such an important way, I think, to begin that final stretch of days before you really jump in, because it gets us in the mood, but it also it prolongs holiness.
It's almost like the synagogue's version of the last few days right before Passover.
Yes.
Where you're cleaning the house, you're doing this preparation of trying to get all the chametz out and all of that. In the synagogue, it's we're switching out the Siddur for the Machzor, the special prayer book that we use for the high holidays, and we're covering everything in white, mm-hmm. and we're cleaning it, and we're making it beautiful so that when everyone comes in, that it's going to be really lovely. And it's that kind of last prep in a way that is holy in and of itself.
Right. And before COVID, actually, it was our practice at OZS to the program before Slichot. We would call it a Slichot sweep, and we would turn over the prayer books for the special high holiday books, right? Like you said, we would put all of the white covers and white curtains up. So I think maybe we'll try to bring that back this year, the Slichot sweep.
That sounds awesome. Well, we will be back after a break with kibitzing with us. Actually, that we're not going away. We're not bringing in special guests. Well, we're bringing in very special guests, but we're not going to be asking them the questions. When you come back after the break, we'll be turning the mics over to our partners, and they are going to be interviewing us about what it's like to be rabbis in Kentucky. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We're taking you now to Ohavay Zion Synagogue in Lexington, Shani's home turf, for a conversation with our lovely spouses, Ariane Barrie-Stern and Joseph Eskin. We are so excited to be here. We have talked about this for a few months now with our partners, with our amazing people who really, more than anyone else, allow us to do our jobs and often help us do our jobs. And my guess is that we'll talk about that a little bit more. So the way it's going to work tonight is we are each going to give our partners bios. We're going to introduce them, and then we are turning things over to them, and they are going to be interviewing us. That we have spent a Jewish year interviewing other Kentuckians. I don't know whether or not I feel totally ready to wear the mantle of Kentuckian yet, but I think I'm getting pretty close. But in any case, we thought it'd be cool to have the tables turned on us and have our partners do the interviewing. So I will go ahead and start. Sitting right next to me is Ariane Barrie-Stern, a born and raised New Yorker. She studied theater directing and worked often in Jewish theater, including for the Jewish Plays Project. She's been acclimating well to life in Kentucky. She now has a driver's license, which is very exciting. For those of you who don't know, in Manhattan, you don't really need one. That's why she waited till she got here. And she is currently pursuing 2 master's degrees simultaneously, a master's of science and social work and a master's in couples and family therapy from the Kent School of Social Work at the University of Louisville. And in addition to all that, she is just an incredible Rebbitzin and Eshet Chayil. She's taught classes at the shul. She helps run our Tot Shabbat program, and she pioneered the open Shabbat that we do at our house, where about once a month we open our home up to the community, and we have cholent that she makes very well, and a lot of other things, and folks just come through and do board games, lawn games, and all sorts of other good schmoozing. So, Ariane Barrie-Stern, welcome to the schmooze.
Thank you.
And to my left is Joseph Eskin, who currently serves as the Director of Jewish Community Expansion here at the Jewish Federation of the Bluegrass, where he works closely with folks within and beyond the Jewish community of Lexington to strengthen connections to Jewish community, build relationships that center on Jewish experience and identity, and most importantly, help grow and sustain our community. Joseph is also the director of the OZS Religious School, a post he's held since 2022, where he has brought, in just 2 short years, so much energy, so much excitement, so much love to our kids and our students. And before moving to Lexington, Joseph taught high school history at the Abraham Joshua Heschel School in Manhattan, and before that at the Rochelle Zell Jewish High School in Deerfield, Illinois. And Joseph, like me, is originally from Skokie, a suburb just north of Chicago, and is, despite that fact, very tragically a White Sox fan. Welcome to the Schmooze.
It's great to be here. Thanks for that. Well, first of all, you're welcome for allowing you to do the podcast over the course of this year.
Perhaps begrudgingly, but I don't know. I've come around.
So we and all your listeners have really gotten to know a bit about your Jewish selves over the course of this podcast. You've talked a lot about yourselves in a Jewish context, and so for this final episode of the season, we want to turn things around a little bit. And challenge you to give a brief bio or narrative of your life that does not include anything about Judaism. So if you were going to give a description of your life, a bio of who you are, without saying anything Jewish, how would you do it?
Huh. Yeah, that's hard.
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to
try.
Go for it? Okay.
Well, I'll start by saying that I'm a Cubs fan, which maybe is important, although I would say a fair weather fan at best. I'm from Chicago, a great city. It's really hard, actually, to describe myself sort of adjacent to or absent from my Jewish identity. I feel like we talk about it so much, and it's so much at the core of who I am. But I grew up in Chicago. I grew up in a wonderful community. I have a younger brother, Kobe, who is 4.5 years younger and lives in Israel, although he'll be here hopefully in a couple of weeks for a while, so you'll all get a chance to meet him and really spend time with him. I went to a high school in Chicago. I feel like I'm doing Mad Libs.
Well, I want to challenge you a little bit. And it's like, for example, you were adopted, right?
I was adopted.
So, like, it's interesting to me. To me, that could be like a formative identity for you, potentially. But I feel like probably you mostly think of yourself as like a Jewish person living a Jewish life. But it occurs to me, that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask the question, is it occurs to me that there maybe are other things that maybe for someone else would be like super central to their identity, but maybe don't.
Yeah, so I think for me, before I made the choice to go to rabbinical school, Judaism was definitely a major part of my life. But if you had asked me for a bio in like the year before I went to rabbinical school, I would have said I was an Uber driving, yoga teaching journalist who tap danced. And so I had kind of these other things that were, I guess, tangential to Judaism, and I was also a bar mitzvah DJ, but that gets into the Jewish stuff. But yeah, I think, I grew up moving around. I'm a 4th generation Texan. I was born in Houston, and then my family lived in North Carolina for a little while, and then Michigan for my dad's job, and mostly kind of grew up in Ann Arbor. I've always really also loved sports. I'm an avid Texas Longhorns fan, as well as exactly Hook'em.
He's taught me well.
And a lot of other things. But yeah, I guess those are the journalism thing. I think was the big kind of defining thing before I was in rabbinical school. Was that I worked for 4 years. I wrote for the Ann Arbor News, and I'd also done internships at NPR stations and other things. And I think that was really kind of my primary identifier. But now that Judaism is so central to career and personal life. In fact, I'll share a quick thing. When I was thinking about what to do, I knew I was going to leave journalism to work in the Jewish world, but I wasn't sure if that meant working for a federation or a Hillel, kind of Jewish nonprofit organizations, or if I wanted to be a rabbi. And the director of admissions at the time, when we were both applying, was a rabbi named Joel Alter, who's a wonderful rabbi. And I had called him on the phone and I'd like told him my whole life story. I'd been talking for like half an hour about like, I was tortured. What do I want to do? And do I want to do this or that? And he stopped me. He said, Ben, you need to ask yourself a question. Are you ready to put God, Torah, and the Jewish people at the center of your personal and professional lives? And if the answer is yes, then you should become a rabbi. And if the answer is no, then there's a lot of other wonderful Jewish jobs that you can do out there. And so in answering that question, yes, then kind of that whole identity thing really wraps itself up.
I think sorry, Ariane.
I thought about cutting you off when you started saying Jewish, but we'll be lenient here.
I just want to add one thing that I'm working on, just to be vulnerable, is actually finding that other thing. Now that I've been in Lexington for 3 years and we're rooted here and we know what our life looks like, we're in a rhythm, I'm trying to push myself to branch out a little bit more beyond the Jewish community and beyond my professional world. And so, I don't know, maybe I'll take up tap dancing or...
What about your knitting?
I knit. I also used to do ballet and gymnastics quite seriously. I don't think that I can get back into those in any serious way, but it's, I think, a challenge for rabbis, and even my struggle to answer the question, I think, speaks to just not how central necessarily, but how all-encompassing, in a beautiful way, the rabbinate can be, but it's also a challenge, and I'm going to hold all of you to hold me accountable to get out of my bubble a little bit.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I say when I talk to rabbinical students. I say, like, find a thing that you do every week that's not your job. Mm-hmm. And so, like, for me right now, I go and play pickleball every week at the JCC. It's super fun. Most of the people there are
Notice, even when he's trying to get out of his realm, he's still at the JCC.
Touche. But when I was in rabbinical school, I went to tap dance classes every week. Like, I think, like, just having that one thing that you can almost disassociate a little bit is really important.
Yeah. I'm curious, Shani, so now that you have told us we have to hold you accountable, if you weren't a rabbi, what would you be doing with your life?
That's such a good question. I think I would have gone to law school, which in a lot of ways is a lot like being a rabbi. But I think my dream job would have been to be a writer. To be an essayist or a columnist of some sort, and live in some far-off romantic place, just writing books and taking walks. I would have liked to be a writer.
I don't know what's more romantic than Lexington, but you know.
And Ben, the same question to you. I mean, you talked about being a journalist, but do you think that's what you would have done professionally if you hadn't gone into the rabbinate?
Yeah, I really loved being a journalist. It was not that I was running away from it to become a rabbi. I really enjoyed my job. In fact, part of the reason I ended up in rabbinical school was I was looking for my next journalism job. So I'd already started interviewing places and was kind of in transition mode. And so it made the switching careers a little bit easier. But yeah, I think I would have loved to get back into, somewhat ironically, audio journalism, where we find ourselves now. But yeah, I really loved, when I talk about journalism, I say I loved asking questions, telling stories, and helping people understand the world around them. So in many ways that transfers well to the rabbinate, but also is kind of uniquely suited to that world of journalism.
Okay. Well, thank you. So now we've heard a little bit about, I mean, I would say that was the hardest question. The rest will be softballs moving forward. Phew. Want to go back a little bit. You two, as you've talked about, have known each other for a long time before you were rabbis in Kentucky. I'm curious if you have any memories of one another from rabbinical school. Like, what was your sense of this person as a first-year rabbinical student? What do you remember? Who was this other person?
What was their reputation?
We have mutually assured destruction here, so.
Do you want to go first, Ben?
Sure. I think that, rabbinical school is kind of a pressure cooker. So you're with these people for 5 years, and especially for the first 2 years, all of your classes are together. The second year, you're living in Israel all together. And so I think in many ways, the other people in your class almost become kind of like caricatures of themselves. Yeah. Like they have like the few things that they're like known for. Like, this person will always talk about X, and that person will always be, silly, and that person will do that. And I think like for Shani, at least my impression of it, especially in those first 2 years, it was like, I grew up Orthodox, but now I'm in this conservative rabbinical school, and I'm wrestling with this, and I like am conflicted in my identities, and I think I'm in the right place, but I'm not totally sure.
Yep.
And so...
It's true.
And like that was obviously the surface level thing, but like in classes, these things would, because so many of our classes dealt with sharing about ourselves, they would come up over and over and over again. Shani was also in a very close friend group with a few of the other people in our rabbinical school, and they also were like I wouldn't say intimidating, but maybe like slightly intimidating crew, just because they were so cool. Like they weren't intimidating.
I can verify that. Super intimidating.
They weren't intimidating.
I did not feel cool in rabbinical school, so just to be clear.
I mean, the bar is low, but it wasn't like they were trying to be intimidating or off-putting. They were just really cool, and you wanted to be friends with them, and they were all very close friends with each other. So,
well, I have a story maybe that is a good foil to that assumption about this friend group of mine. So does anyone here know or everyone know what planking is? Okay. And there was when was it? Like 2015, 2016, where people would plank ironically in random places. You would just lay flat as a board. And so Maya, one of the women in this friend group, started I was also behind it, started an Instagram account called Jewish Theological Planking. And our rabbinical school was called Jewish Theological Seminary, and so we would plank and we would find other people, other rabbinical and cantorial students to plank in various places in our rabbinical school building. And we would write up a whole bio, and the caption of the Instagram post would be a little mini drash on the person and the significance of the place where they chose to plank. And it was really weird.
Yeah.
And only the kind of thing that could only thrive and be perceived as cool in a place like the Jewish Theological Seminary. We've come a long way, I think.
We're
but now you all know
much
that
cooler
story,
now.
So. I think my impression of you, Ben, and maybe it's related to what you shared about me, some context, is that I was the only person in our rabbinical school class who grew up Orthodox. And even though it wasn't exactly true, I had this feeling about our class that everyone else knew what to do and knew what was going on, learned how to read Torah when they were very young, had grown up in egalitarian Jewish spaces their whole lives, and just it seemed to me like everyone around me seemed so at home at JTS. And here I had come from a radically different place, and was also, I think, pretty regularly being reminded of that. And socially, I felt very at home. We have an amazing class. We're still in touch. But I felt really, really self-conscious for the first several years of rabbinical school. And I really was, you said it sort of jokingly, but I really was struggling to fit in and find my place, and it was just such a serious departure from where I had come from. And so my sense of you, Ben, was just that you were so sure of yourself and so confident, and you would come to school and you would tap dance and you would dress up, and Ben was really goofy, and hopefully you can tell he continues to be very goofy. But I think over the course of the 5 years, that goofiness, and we became close, it was an invitation to me, and felt like you had a way of inviting me in to be more confident and more silly and more myself. And what I very quickly learned throughout the 5 years was that no one felt comfortable, and we weren't really making it up, but everyone had questions about what they were doing there and how they fit in and what their identity was going to look like going forward. And I think you actually played a really big role in helping me to relax a little bit.
Glad I was able to help.
I will just say it is really wild to hear you say that, because I thought you were the coolest person. I think all your female classmates, but especially in knowing your background, which was so much of what I was striving towards at that time, I was like, Shani's so cool. I could never talk to her. She's the coolest person ever. I remember.
I hope no one
One of the
feels
first times I met both of y'all was at your Sheva Brachot, and I came with Ben pretty early in our relationship, and I remember walking in the door and being like, I hope I can like talk to them. Like, just like, don't say anything too weird, Ariane.
Okay, and just so you feel better, that's what I say to myself and out loud to Joseph all the time, even now. As an adult woman, professional woman in my mid-30s, don't say anything weird,
Yeah.
Shani, please. So, a little bit behind the curtain.
I just say the weird thing.
Switching gears a little bit to talk about now you finished rabbinical school, Mazel Tov. You came to Kentucky, and you've talked a little bit on the podcast about the impetus for starting this podcast being about the reactions you got when you said you were coming to Kentucky, and people saying, "Oh, wait, there's Jews there." Well, we know that there's Jews here, but what are some of the differences that you've noticed between like communities you've been in the past and the Jewish communities here in Kentucky? I know that especially like coming from a big community like Chicago, you've been in several different communities. How's it different?
Yeah, so we were just talking about this question over the weekend. We were in Chicago for a wedding, and we stayed in Skokie. And we were remarking that many of the synagogues in Skokie, and there are many, are actually all breakaway communities from one big community in Skokie. And so that is, I don't think it's necessarily unique to places like Chicago, but it's not something that could happen here. And one thing that's been not surprising, but I think heartening and really beautiful and powerful to see and also be at the center of here is that, you know, it's not the case that if something upsets you in your synagogue or if you feel a little bit out of place, that you can just leave and go down the block. Like, we have 2 synagogues in town, and we're fortunate to have members who belong both here at OZS and also at TAI. But in Chicago, it was very common, and in New York too, for people to form breakaway minions, breakaway minyanim that, you know, just formed a group of people who felt disaffected or uncomfortable for whatever reason, wanted something else, and they would leave and start their own thing. And what that meant was that the community was often like very diffuse. And here in Lexington, and I know it's true in Louisville too, you know, people are so committed to this place and this community, regardless of where you affiliate, because I think people really have an understanding that you can't just leave, and that the synagogue and the community rely on each and every person to be here. And that means, I think, that we are, and we're working on it and getting better at it, but we really try hard to live with discomfort and be in relationship with people who maybe view prayer and liturgy and religious observance differently or have different politics than we do. But there's a different kind of appreciation for this thing, I think.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things, and it's interesting because I hadn't thought about it in the way that you're saying it, but that one of the things that happens when everything is kind of a derivative or is a breakaway or something like that is most of those institutions then aren't that old. That they're only maybe 1 to 2 generations old. And one of the things that's really struck me here, and also because most of my formative years were in Ann Arbor, which is a college town, and so even though there are people who stick around for a while, there's some amount of transience there, that there are people in our synagogues who, like, their great-great-great-grandparents were on the board or helped to cover the mortgage of the first building or, you know, any of these things that I don't think I've ever been in a community that felt as like deeply rooted. And I think that comes with pros and cons, that some of that is like, well, then if you weren't here for 4 generations, then you're not really the same level a part of this as I am. And I think that we have to push back against that kind of feeling because that can, you know, leave others out. But the level of dedication and the level of care and the level of kind of appreciation for the history of the community, to me, feels really cool. And feels really neat and really beautiful. And that's just one I mean, I could talk a lot about all of the different ways that the communities are different, but that would be the one thing that I think to me stands out is the like depth of institutional memory and personal memory that comes from being in a place for not just a couple decades, but, you know, generations.
It's really, really interesting. It makes me think about, I mean, not that we need to like sell people on the worthwhileness of this podcast because you already picked up for season 2, so that's not the goal of this evening. But I do wonder if that's like in some ways it seems like this season of the podcast has potentially been about educating people in Kentucky about Judaism, right? And there's also a piece maybe about like educating non-Kentucky Jews about what Jewish life looks like and means here. And it does feel to me, as someone who's only been here for a few years, that is like a lesson that other communities could learn. Is what would it look like if you, as you said, like leaned into some discomfort and accepted that maybe this community wouldn't fill every need you had as a Jew in exactly the way you wish that need was filled, but that you wanted to be a part of that community anyway, and that you realized that everyone was sort of making that compromise and had been making that compromise for generations.
Absolutely. And I think that we talked with Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky in the last episode, and he was talking about kind of his transition from Louisville to New York. And one of the things about being in New York is if you're looking for like a synagogue that uses these specific tunes and has a vegan potluck and is, right, like has all, like checks all of these boxes, you can probably find it. And if not, then it's probably down the street. Whereas here, like Shani was saying, that there's much more of a pluralism, that every synagogue is by necessity somewhat pluralistic because it has to contain multitudes. And so on the one hand, you're not going to get that really specific experience that you might want that's tailored just to you. That's not going to be the Judaism that you're going to be able to find. But your Judaism will be enriched, I think, by coming into deep contact and relationship with people who do Judaism different from you. Because if you only go to that one minyan with the tunes you like and the vegan potluck, then there's a whole Jewish world that you're never going to explore.
I think I just want to add to that one of the other benefits and gifts of being in a small Jewish community and belonging to a smaller synagogue is that if you actually have a vision for what that tailor-made Jewish experience is that you're looking for, like, we can try to make it happen, right? I think in bigger congregations, people often feel lost and feel like there's a very hierarchical sort of top-down vision for what religious life should be. And I don't think that's true here. And I think one thing that I would love to do more of for myself personally is like lean into the discomfort and try different things and encourage people in our community here at OZS, but writ large in Lexington, to try on different kinds of Jewish experiences, religious experiences, spiritual experiences, political experiences. I actually was talking to a community member this morning who said that he had developed a class called Bites or Tastes of Judaism. And it was a 30-week class. They would cover 30 different topics. And it was intended to be a hands-on experiential class where you would try something new within a Jewish framework that you had never done before, and maybe even something that you were made uncomfortable by, or you thought, it's those kinds of Jews who do Shabbat that way, or it's the people at that synagogue who think about this text in this particular way. That's something that I think is possible a little bit more so in places like ours.
Okay, please let me know if y'all do that, because I want to. So you spoke a bit about how old and how much history there is within the communities here, and with that often comes synagogue lore. And I think that some of what we've had the most fun with since coming to these congregations is learning some of these like really fun stories that are rooted deep in the history of our congregations that people love to talk about. And so I'm curious. I mean, I don't know about this congregation, but I certainly know about in ours. What's your favorite synagogue lore? The best story you've heard since you've come here?
This one is easy for me. So Knesset Israel used to be an Orthodox synagogue, and it used to be downtown Louisville at the corner of Floyd and Jacob Street, and it had a balcony, and the women would sit in the balcony, and the men would sit in the ground floor. And according to not only the stories I've heard, but the newspaper article that I have seen, the first time that they had mixed seating, when the women came and sat down on the main floor, there was a fist fight that broke out. The police had to be called. And in the aftermath, people sued the synagogue. They sued the board of directors of the synagogue because they had joined a synagogue that didn't have mixed seating, and now it did. And this was just, terrible. And it ended up, I don't know how the lawsuit ended up, but just the fact that there was that level of rumpus over mixed seating is my personal favorite piece of KI synagogue lore.
That's amazing. So, Joseph, you're going to have to help me tell this story because I feel like your reaction to it is part of the lore, which is that I think it was our first year here. We were new and susceptible to pranks.
Some would say we are still susceptible to pranks. But...
So our synagogue also used to be Orthodox, also used to be downtown. And someone shared with me that during Yom Kippur, when she was a girl, she would sneak away from services, and down the street there was a hotel, and there were monkeys at the hotel. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Okay, there are some hands. For those listening, there are some hands in the audience. And when she told me this story, I obviously believed her, and I shared it with Joseph, and you reacted to me.
I said they are BSing you.
There's no way that this person is telling you the truth.
They're seeing how far they can push you in year one.
Wow, that's so amazing. What an incredible story. And it turns out that it actually was true. Does anyone remember the name of the hotel?
Kimball House.
The Kimball House, yes. And does anyone, Joe, did you spend time with the monkeys?
I try not to.
Wire hangers, they'd open up and we'd feed the monkeys.
So I still haven't gotten a straight answer about how these monkeys came to be in Lexington, why they were here.
Did they fast on Yom Kippur? There's so many questions.
The alternative service was at the Kimball House.
They were not Jewish.
Anyway, I think that is the synagogue lore that is just seared into my mind as a core memory of being a new rabbi at OZS.
I feel like when we moved here, several people gave us this book by Lee Shai Weisbach, Jewish Synagogues of Kentucky.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you also received one or two copies of that book when you moved here?
Yes. And he is Lee Shai Weisbach, Zichrono Livracha. He unfortunately passed away just in the past couple of years. Was a tremendous scholar, not only of Judaism in Kentucky, but in small towns across America.
I was thinking that the next great Jewish Kentucky book could be called, From Fist Fights to Monkey Cages. Jewish Life in Kentucky.
Would read. Yeah. Or write.
Yeah, that'll be season 3 of it.
I will say mine. Nobody asked, but I'm going to share anyway. There was a dentist who used to be a member of the Jewish community in Louisville who made mosaics. And when we did not get to see the synagogue in person, as I think y'all didn't either when we were interviewing, but we got a Zoom tour, and they show us this mosaic, and they said, there's teeth hidden in the mosaic. And this is our first introduction to this community. And they're like, but we won't tell you where the teeth are. You have to find them yourself. And I thought that was really wonderfully weird and very much fit our vibe, but it was risky of them to tell us that because we could have been very freaked out.
They didn't tell us that story when we interviewed it.
We gave off different vibes.
So I'm happy that the four of us are here together because we, as has been talked about already, we knew each other in New York before any of us were married, and so our lives have gone in different directions. Since then. I hope it's not breaking news on this podcast. I don't think it is because I listened to the episodes. I think this has been said before. But Ben and Ariane are expecting a baby, B'Shah Tovah. We're very excited.
I think you are breaking the news.
I think that is
on
breaking
the
news for the podcast.
Yeah.
But
I could have sworn that was
surprised.
Okay, the sound person will cut this later.
No, it's okay. We're totally fine with it.
We're ready for you to break the news. It's written on the sheet.
That's true. Well, B'Shah Tovah, we're wishing you good health and a lot of luck in the coming months. So I know that in a moment, we're going to have the chance to offer you some advice about raising a Jewish Kentuckian, which we have a couple years' experience of doing. But first, selfishly, I wanted to ask you, Ben and Ariane, if you want to chip in. As people who don't have kids, what advice or encouragement do you have about having a social life in the midst of being a rabbinic couple?
So it's a good question.
When he proposed this question, when we were talking, I said I was honored that he thought we had a social life.
The first thing I will say is actually I think Ariane has more of a organic Louisville social life than I do. That it was something that she worked really hard. I think we were both concerned when we got there that, kids can, on the one hand, make it hard to have a social life, but also give you kind of instant community with other people who have kids of that age. And so we didn't have that when we were arriving. And I think Ariane really felt that acutely because I was coming in with a job with people who I would meet with a congregation. And so she did a really amazing job, I think, over the first 6 months to a year. And our closest relationships in Louisville are ones that she worked really hard to establish. And so I want to give her a lot of credit there. Some of it was luck. We had congregants who invited a couple and us and made a little couple shidduch, and they're now some of our closest friends. I would say pickleball, but also most of the people I play pickleball with are twice my age. So I don't know if that's they are wonderful people, but it's not the most vibrant social.
But here's what's going to happen. We're going to practice babysitting, right? We need practice. So you'll bring your kids to us and we'll watch your kids. And then what date night are they going to go on in Kentucky?
Oh, in Louisville, there's so many great fun date nights in Louisville. And that is one thing that we also really have focused on is a social life doesn't just have to be with other people, it's also with each other. And that we have intentionally, tried to find restaurants that we like, gone on little adventures. The state fair is going on right now. There's all sorts of fun things to do around town. And I think we are season ticket holders and proud supporters of Racing Louisville soccer team, which is a lot of fun.
Go Big Perp.
Go Big Perp. But we actually, most of their games are on Shabbat, on Saturdays, and so we walk to the stadium, which is about a 2-hour walk for us. But it's mostly through, if you're from Louisville, Cherokee Park, beautiful park. If you're not from Louisville, you should visit it. It's wonderful. And so most of our walk is through Cherokee Park. So it becomes this just really nice Shabbat walk for us. And then we end at a soccer game. We see friends. We connect with people.
And y'all can totally steal this date night idea now because there's a new professional women's soccer team in Lexington.
That's true.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's your date night.
Thank you.
Was that enough on social life?
By the way, I feel like there's a thing in recording podcasts that you can go back and re-record something. So if you want to, we could go back and record this in a way where you get to announce that you're
No, we wanted you. We designed it this
socially
way.
inept co-host announcing it for you.
No, we designed it this way. It's less awkward if you're the one saying it.
Okay,
I
great.
feel like. Well, so on that note, my family is very deeply rooted in New York, and so sometimes I have moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, my kid is going to be born in Kentucky? That's wild. But the two of you have done that twice now. So what advice do you have for us on how to raise a Jewish kid in Kentucky?
That's a great question. I think my first piece of advice, which I'm still learning to adopt fully for myself, is just to be open to all of the different kinds of ways that your kid can experience and learn about Judaism. I grew up in a very sweet but very insular community, and I actually didn't see a lot of different kinds of ways of being Jewish. And so one of the things that feels very new for me and a little bit scary but so incredible is to watch Elisheva, especially because she's, nearly 2.5 and is starting to articulate her feelings and what she's seeing a little bit more, just to see her experience Judaism through her, for me to experience her Judaism through her eyes. And the level of comfort that she has here in the synagogue you guys should come join us for a Shabbat morning service. She is tearing up the bima. She's running all over the place, makes a beeline, when we do Kiddush and Hamotzi to the bima. And it really does feel, and especially from my perch on the bima, I'm watching and I look out and I know that Elisheva and also Tzipi can go to anyone in the congregation and be held and fed and just be loved and taken care of, which was an experience that I had growing up in my synagogue. But when I had that experience, I was being exposed consistently to the same kind of Judaism. The same messages were being reinforced, even by different people. And it's really sweet to think that when Elisheva goes up to someone for a box of raisins, which she knows now, she knows that person to go to, that person is having a different experience of the service and of her Judaism than, another community member and congregant on the other side of the synagogue. So I think watching her and knowing that there are compromises and things that we're going to do differently just because of the nature of, the Lexington Jewish community, it's been, for me, really, really powerful. And I think I'm learning something about my own Jewish identity that I didn't have access to growing up, and I get to sort of have it all over again and relive my own Jewish childhood through her eyes and her experience.
I would just add one thing to that, which is I think if we were, Shani and I grew up 5 blocks away from each other in Skokie, Evanston, in the Chicago suburbs. And I think if we were raising our kids in that neighborhood, I could see myself wanting them to grow up in the same way that I grew up and do the same things that I did, because I feel pretty lucky in my life and things have worked out well. I feel happy. I have a family that I support, whatever. Things have gone well. It's okay, so they just go through the same process and it'll all be perfect. And I think being in a new place, very different in a lot of ways from where I grew up, it has given me some humility as a parent, where I sort of just have to trust the expertise and wisdom of the people in the community. I remember at we got a group of young adults together for a schmooze event at someone's house, and we were sitting around the living room and talking about, what it's like to grow up Jewish in Kentucky and raise Jewish kids. And I heard from I would say most of the people my age in the room about their experiences being proselytized to in high school as kids, and their friends, out of a total sense of generosity and kindness and love, wanting them to be saved. And that is definitely not the experience I had at my Jewish day school or public high school that had both days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur off as official holidays for teachers and students. And the people I was talking to, these friends in the community, weren't catastrophizing. Right. They were taking seriously what that experience had been like for them. But they were and I grew up, and this was a thing that happened as I grew up, and it shaped me in a way. And so I think it's been nice to, challenge my own maybe innate desire to make my kid like me, and instead let them grow up in the place that they're really growing up.
Are you trying to make the pregnant lady cry? Wow, that's really beautiful. Thank you all for sharing that. Switching gears a little bit, we suspect that now that y'all are seasoned podcasters, literally a season of a podcast, people might be a little bit interested to hear about the process of you making the podcast, about what that's been like for you. I was definitely skeptical about how much of Ben's time it would take up, but y'all have handled that very gracefully. So maybe just a super brief process. Can you tell us what it looks like to put an episode together?
Yeah, so I feel I just want to say a little bit about the origins of the podcast, because all the credit really goes to Ben. I think when we moved to Lexington, I felt so at home in our Jewish community, but very, very isolated as a Jew in Kentucky. And Ben came to me and said, and we had been meeting every week, we had a chavruta, we were trying to study together, but we really would just catch up and, and Ben said, Louisville Public Media has a podcast incubator, and I think we should do a podcast about Jewish life in Kentucky. And I rolled my eyes and I said, no one is going to care about that. And that actually stemmed from a place of my own loneliness and anxiety about what it meant to move here. And I've been proven wrong in so many beautiful ways over the last 3 years. And I remember I said to you, if you want to take the lead on the proposal, you have my blessing, you have my bracha, and I will commit to co-hosting with you and working on it with you if they accept it. And they did. And obviously here we are. And I just want to say that our producers, Laura and Alex, and everyone that we've encountered at LPM has been not just curious and sensitive and supportive, but I think has helped me feel at home in this place where we know the Jewish community is small, and you have all helped me feel a little bit less lonely and a little bit less isolated. And that just feels important to say, to lay the groundwork for what it actually feels like and means for us to work on this show and work on each episode as a team, because that has really informed my experience of this work.
Yeah. And I, having had a background in broadcast journalism, I was kind of like, even if we don't get accepted, we could do a podcast, I could edit it. How hard could it be? And
it's very hard.
You wonder why Shani thought he was confident in rabbinical school.
Thank God we didn't do that. Really, just as Shani said, I actually first ran this by Rachel Firkins, who works for Louisville Public Media and is in the event space, and she said, there's a firewall. I can't, advocate for this, but you should submit it because I think it would be really cool. And yeah, just the work that Laura does. I remember in our first production meeting with Laura, Shani and I were talking, and she had this Google Doc open, and I saw that the doc was getting longer and longer, but I didn't know what was going on. She was just writing all of her questions about all of the things that we said that she didn't know what a word was or didn't know what we were talking about. And first of all, that was so tremendously helpful for us as rabbis who are used to talking to Jews, having someone there who can check us and be like, wait a second, no one knows what you're saying when you say that, was really, really wonderful. And both Laura and Alex have done so much. But just kind of how an episode comes together. We tape the This Month in Judaism segments, which you'll be hearing this first. Next season are going to be kind of this topic in Judaism. We'll get a catchier name, but it's going to be kind of more topical and less tied to the calendar because, well, we've told you about all the holidays, so we want to talk about other things. But so we tape kind of a bunch of those at once, so usually 3-ish at a go, where we'll go either to the NPR station downtown in Louisville or to Radio Lex here in Lexington, and we sit there and Shani and I chat, and Laura types questions, or Alex or whoever's there helping us out. And then the interviews, we do them in person as much as possible. So we schedule with our guests if they're able to come in person. If not, we use this really fun audio tool called Riverside, where people can kind of Zoom-ish in. And we interview them, and then Laura makes the magic happen, and she looks at what parts to cut, because we usually say things that are worth cutting, and then kind of tightens it up. And then the last bit is what's called continuity, which is where those little bits that are welcome back from the break, or we're here on the Bluegrass Schmooths this month, we'll be talking about this, stay tuned. We tape those usually a couple days before the episode hits, and then magic happens on the internet, and the episode comes out on Rosh Chodesh.
Yeah, perfectly said. Nothing to add.
One question I had, maybe hopefully a quick question. I remember I was listening to a podcast one time, and the hosts were saying that when you are hosting a podcast, you want to put out your persona, but 10% more. Or something like that, and that's how it becomes entertainment instead of just listening to two people talk in a boring way about their lives or whatever. And clearly, you've succeeded because it's a very popular podcast. So I was going to ask, do you think that your podcast persona is in any way different from your regular persona, or do you feel like you're being true to who you are when you're sitting for the podcast?
I mean, I feel like being a rabbi is also like taking your personality and making it 10% more. Like when you're schmoozing with congregants or when you're giving a sermon, like we're used to kind of like performing in that way. So I would say that my podcast persona is very much my rabbi persona, which is, again, as we discussed at the very beginning of this episode, not so different from my regular persona. But if there is a heightening to it, it's kind of that it feels very comfortable because I live in that little bit of heightened sense a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that feels true for me too. I feel like it's true here at OZS, but on the podcast, just because of, the nature of sitting in a booth, and it is goofy, and a lot of like really silly things come out that maybe wouldn't come out in quite the same way at work. I'm just thinking about, I used to love Clay Aiken, if anyone remembers him, runner-up on American Idol Season 2, and somehow that sort of naturally came out. And so I think, and when we're interacting with guests, I feel like we tone that down a little bit. But there's a silliness to it. I think even if we're in rabbi mode, there's a comfort and, a lightness.
So we're going to transition into the lightning round.
Ooh.
Yes.
I wonder what questions they'll ask us.
Well,
in the lightning
it's funny you ask that then, because we've heard your lovely lightning round questions a lot this season, and so we wanted to ask some different ones. Surprise lightning round questions. I don't know if you want to start.
Sure, I'll start with the first one. What is your favorite book with a Jewish theme?
Easy.
Yeah.
The Chosen by Chaim Potok.
The Source by James Michener.
What is your favorite Jewish life cycle ritual to officiate?
Oh, boy. I mean, I think I got to go weddings. Like, weddings are just so much fun. They're great. Yeah, weddings.
Weddings, and then I would say baby namings are a close runner-up.
Yeah. More cuteness, less frivolity.
If you're allowed to ask a follow-up to the lightning round, specifically baby namings or like Briss's baby namings?
Well, I think in our community, and I think this is true across the country in the non-Orthodox world, it's becoming more popular for couples who, even if they're choosing to do a Brit Milah and a circumcision, to actually have the baby naming piece of the ceremony be more public, be the thing that the community is actually celebrating. So I think they go hand in hand. Yeah.
Who is your favorite Jewish TV character?
Oh, Toby Ziegler from The West Wing. And then Josh Lyman from The West Wing.
It's like all of the West Wing.
Oh, man, that's really hard. I don't remember the character's name, but her Jewish arc was, I think, one of the portrayals of Judaism I liked most on TV. It was in Orange is the New Black. This woman went on where she at first was like trying to say she was Jewish just so she could get kosher food. Tasty, thank you, yes, Tasty. But then by the end of that season had like come to deeply appreciate Judaism and did end up converting, and I loved her Jewish arc. I thought that was a really beautiful portrayal of someone like learning to love Judaism for what it really is.
So you like weddings and baby namings. What is your least favorite part of your job?
Okay. Do you have
go
one?
First.
Okay. Funerals, but not for the reason you think. I actually, like, funerals is a really amazing, beautiful experience in that you get to really be with people in vulnerable moments, and I think it's a really tremendously rewarding part of my job.
Yeah, I actually thought you might have said that for favorite life cycle ritual.
But the logistics are miserable because you don't know they're coming. It messes up your whole week because you have to move things around for the intake meeting and then writing a eulogy on short notice. And it just really and then you have to move all those meetings. And so then the rest of the week becomes busier. It's really the logistics that happen when like the out of the blue thing comes up, and the out of the blue thing that comes up most often is a funeral.
I think this is hard. Every so often, especially when there's something big happening in the Jewish world in the news, I get contacted by the press, and that is very stressful. Talking to the press about, after October 7th, many reporters reached out, through the office more officially and then unofficially on Facebook and on my cell phone, and that feels very overwhelming. And to think about, here at Shul, we can think out loud and process, and not everything has to be perfectly polished. But talking to the press as one of just 3 rabbis in town feels very stressful to me, to say the right thing and capture how Jews are feeling about any one thing at any given time, which is, everyone's laughing here. We know that that's not possible. But that, I think, is the least favorite thing that happens in my job.
And our last one is favorite holiday, which you can answer either as just a member of the Jewish community, as a rabbi running a synagogue, or both.
I think it's Sukkot for me, the whole week of Sukkot. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur are ecstatic, and a lot of work and a lot of energy goes into coordinating and running those holidays, not just by the clergy, but actually by all of the volunteers and community members who chip in. And then Sukkot is this just week of peace, and things feel a little bit more fluid and a little bit less tense. And we also obviously build a sukkah here, and we're outside a little bit more. It's starting to cool off. It's something changes, and I feel like that's when we collectively get to take a breath after the intensity of the high holidays. Not to say that there isn't a lot of work that also goes into coordinating Sukkot, but it just feels like a breath.
I think for me, as a just Jewish person, Pesach, Passover. I love Seders. I love the holiday. It really, really speaks to me as a person. As a rabbi, I think it might be Shavuot. And specific, because I love learning and teaching, and Shavuot is a time when people come, especially for that Tikkun Leil, that night of learning. And I really love what we've been able to do in Louisville, honestly, where we have conservative and Orthodox Jews coming together to learn together. Sometimes the Reform community joins us as well. And I think that having kind of a pluralistic Jewish learning experience, I love. And when I teach classes normally, a few people show up, but Tikkun Leil, you get to teach a class and a whole bunch of people show up, and that's always fun. So yeah, I would say that would be my rabbinic fave.
Okay. Well, because it is the last episode of the first season, we are also going to give you the traditional lightning round questions. We'll use that favorite Jewish holiday as a transition point. So next up is honey cake or apples and honey?
Apples and honey.
Absolutely apples and
Hand
honey.
down, hands
Definitely.
What is your best Purim costume?
Oh, boy.
We've got a good one for this year.
We do. I'll say I think the one that I like most, which I'm told helped me get my current job because one of the search committee members' daughters saw a video of this, was I was a tap dancing Daffy Duck down in Little Rock, Arkansas. I rented the full big Daffy Duck costume with a big floppy butt, and it was very fun.
Our first Purim with Elisheva, we dressed up as the galaxy and space. We had a space-themed costume, and that was really fun. I mean, I guess the favorite costume that I'm talking about is Elisheva dressed up as a little astronaut. So not my costume, but her costume.
What is the best break-fast food?
You're up first.
Herring and wine sauce.
Bagel and cream cheese.
Potato kugel. No one asked, but that's my answer. I want to know yours now.
You said potato kugel?
Yeah.
Mine is probably deviled eggs. Deviled eggs. Yeah, deviled eggs for sure.
Ben's dad would be proud of you.
Loves deviled eggs.
What is your favorite biblical character?
I can go first. It's a little weird. My favorite biblical character is Bat Sion, who's the metaphorical embodiment of Jerusalem in the Book of Lamentations. And the reason...
I'm sorry, are you a rabbi?
And
She was really cool in rabbinical school.
hard to tell now. You wouldn't know it. But the reason she's my favorite is because the Book of Lamentations is obviously about this collective trauma, the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. And it's the beginning of our expulsion into the diaspora and the beginning of the Judaism that we see here and practice today. But her character is so poignant because this should be its own side episode, I guess. But it was really through this character that I learned about critical feminist biblical theory.
Okay, this is why I thought you were cool.
And just to have she's a tragic character, but she in many ways is also the protagonist of this very important text that we read. It's sort of through her eyes. And sorry, this is the lightning round, and I'm going way too long.
Rolling thunder.
Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, who we had on the podcast last month, his wife, Rabbi Amy Kalmanovsky, is a Bible professor at JTS.
And Louisville native.
And she is really the person in rabbinical school who showed me that there was not just a different kind of way to read Tanakh and study Torah, but a different way where I could actually, as a woman, be at the center of it. And we studied the book of Eicha, we studied Lamentations. And so the Bat Zion character, again, this metaphor, became really, really important to me. And it's hard to see on the surface, but a beautiful story of devastation and trauma, but then ultimately a community rebuilding itself in the face of something tragic, but building something new. We'll edit that down, I promise.
So I'd never actually really thought about this really hard, and it's funny that it got turned around. But I think Eliyahu, because Elijah is this prophet who at first is like very kind of zealous and fanatical, which is something I talk about probably more than I need to from the Bima, about like the dangers of that. But then he is someone who really gets toned down by God, that like God tells him that, you know, God is not in the fire, the wind, and all that, but in this like still small voice. And then Elijah's legacy is not of fanaticism and zealousness, but of visiting brisses and seders and heralding the Messiah and like doing all these things, that he like has this kind of really interesting arc that doesn't quite actually come to its conclusion in Tanakh itself, but then is like just this person who also, you know, disguises himself and helps random people, and like how you go from being this like kind of scary, violent person to just wanting to help everyone, I think is really interesting.
Okay, we'll see if we can answer this next question without any discourses on biblical metaphors. Hamantashen or Latka?
Latka.
I am a Latka.
Thanks, y'all. So I guess now we're going to transition to the L'chaim of the month. I don't remember the words you all used to introduce that, but where we
say l'chaim to a person, an individual, a group, someone who you want to lift up this month of Elul.
After we finish recording up here, when we move into the social hall for our party, there will be ample amounts of bourbon and things to make your own l'chaims of the month on, so everyone's invited to do that afterward. Can I do two?
It's your podcast.
Okay, I'm going to do two. My first l'chaim of the month is to our community here and your community in Louisville, who not only supported and was curious, but encouraged us to really run with this project. And my second l'chaim is to all of the women that I went to rabbinical school with, who really shaped me and I think in many ways brought me specifically here to this place and this moment. L'chaim.
L'chaim. I'm also going to do 2 because, why not? The first l'chaim, given the news that Joseph broke a little bit earlier, is I want to say l'chaim to my amazing partner next to me, who has been growing a human over the past number of months and is just amazing and incredible. And I feel so lucky to get to be a part of this journey alongside her. And then the other l'chaim here at the end of season 1, I want to shout out to our LPM crew, all of the people who make this podcast happen, because as my hubris was high, that the work that they do, I could not do. And so to Laura and to Alex and to all of the engineers and to Rachel, who helps put together the events, and really just the whole LPM podcast family. L'chaim.
L'chaim. Do you two want to share?
Yeah, you have. Yeah, you guys also have l'chaims.
I will also do 2. To our friends Ariel Katz and Gabby Plotkin, who got married this past Sunday. So mazel tov to them. And in the weeks leading up to their wedding, when they were starting to get a little stressed and needed to decompress and relax, they came to visit us in Lexington. So the Kentucky air helped relax them and soothe them, and they are officially married. So mazel tov to them. We love you.
L'chaim.
Okay, well, if everyone else got 2. I was originally going to give my l'chaim to you, Ben, because as I mentioned, I was definitely skeptical about him taking on another thing. Rabbis do a lot, and I like hanging out with him. And but you are always bringing me out of my comfort zone, case in point. And you are always showing me that we can do more, and that that can be beautiful, and it can bring beautiful things to our lives and to the world. And I really appreciate you stretching me in that way. And then my other l'chaim was going to be to my parents, because we just spent a really lovely week with them. And I am an anxious pregnant person, in case anyone was wondering. And they had to listen to me and my anxiety for a week, and they did that beautifully and with a lot of grace. And so l'chaim to them.
L'chaim.
Thank you all so much for being here and schmoozing with us. This was really a dream come true. So much fun. And who would have thought that, 2 rabbis who went to JTS and didn't know where they were going to land would land in Kentucky together and would get to do this amazing podcast with all of you by our sides. And again, just thank you to our LPM team. And also thank you to Kate and Anna, part of our administrative staff here, who just make my job really, really easy, and to all of our volunteers. And everyone is invited into the social hall to schmooze and continue the party. And don't forget to take a l'chaim of the month. There are also non-alcoholic options if you don't want to drink. But thank you all so, so much for being here. We had a blast schmoozing with you.
Also, l'chaim to you, Joseph, for doing this with me.
Yeah. Thank you to Joseph and Ariane for hosting us.
It's hard to believe, but that's it for season 1 of the Bluegrass Schmooze. But don't worry, we're not going anywhere. We'll be right back after Rosh Hashanah with a brand new season. We hope to see you then.
The Bluegrass Schmooze is created and produced by Rabbi Ben Fried and me, Rabbi Shani Abramowitz. Our executive producer is Laura Ellis. We get audio assistance from Alex Biscardi. Rachel Firkins is our events director, and Eric Matthews engineered our live taping. Our social media coordinator is Eden Unger. Our show is made possible by support from the Jewish Heritage Fund. Our opening and closing song is Jew from Kentucky, written by Dan Byrne and performed by Dan Byrne and Bridget Kalin. Thanks to Knesset Israel Congregation in Louisville and Ohavay Zion Synagogue in Lexington for believing in 2 young rabbis and helping us make this podcast a reality. The Bluegrass Schmooze is part of the Louisville Public Media Podcast Incubator, with support from the Eye Care Institute's Butchertown Clinical Trials. You can find us on Instagram at Bluegrass Schmooze. For more information, to keep in touch, and to learn how you can help us continue this work, visit bluegrassschmooze.org.
We're Jews from Kentucky, that's what we are. We drink our mint juleps from a kosher dill jar. Wherever we wander, wherever we roam, Jews from Kentucky is always at home. Zagazund, everybody.
Support for LPM podcasts comes from the Eye Care Institute and Butchertown Clinical Trials, where they strive for diversity, equity, and inclusion within their staff, patients, and clinical trial participants. To learn more, visit butchertown.clinic.